Hey, Will Brink here at NutraBio. Some of you may recall a video I had years ago that described how supplements are made, the very simple process from sourcing to contract manufacturing and so forth, which just outlined how supplements are made. But what we're going to do is get really granular as to how supplements are made and go through the process with Mark Glazier, who is president of NutraBio. And we're going to emphasize a bit where NutraBio goes the extra mile, beyond where they have to go by basic minimum GMP standards. So I'm going to bring Mark in here, who's making noise. You go, Mark Glazier.
Hello. Hello.
All right. So basically, now remember, Mark at NutraBio, they're not contract manufacturers. They are primary manufacturers of their own product, which is a different setup. So remember that when you watch my other video, which I'll link. What we're going to go through is basically how does a company, NutraBio in particular, how do they go from choosing an ingredient through the entire process and all that. So we're going to start basically right here. Let's say this is a new ingredient that they want to try, they want to start, they want to put in a formula, right? Mm-hmm. So what would the process be? You've got it's come to your attention through a study or whatever, mm-hmm. You're interested, you look into it, and you're starting here.
All right, so provided that we've already approved the ingredient for use and said, okay, this is an ingredient that we want, it's an ingredient, we looked at the research, we want it in the product, so mm-hmm. That's a separate section. This is once we've done that and we want to bring the product in. So the first thing we have to do is we have to qualify that ingredient. So there's 3 steps. First we have to qualify the manufacturer. We have to go to the manufacturer, we have to make sure they're doing their processes the right way, their GMP facility, and that we want to purchase from them. Okay? There's a step that a lot of companies miss, and that's the middle step, and that's the vendor, because a lot of these companies that manufacture, some products are manufactured in China and India, even places in the United States, mm-hmm. don't ship directly. They use distributors or middlemen. Mm-hmm. So we then have to qualify this distributor, and that's a very, very key point, because there's a lot of distributors out there that will play some games. Or they're not really high quality, they don't know how to process products properly, they'll mess up labels, they'll bring ingredients in wrong, and things will happen in their warehouse. Or they just simply switch manufacturers, switch CVAs, switch labels, and play games, and we've caught people doing that as well. So we have to qualify the manufacturer, we have to qualify the vendor who's going to be shipping if it's separate from the manufacturer, mm-hmm. and third and most importantly, then we have to qualify the ingredient. So we'll get samples of the ingredients in, and it'll go through all type of testing. We'll do some internal testing, but it will go out to a third-party lab for identity testing, for purity, for potency, for composition, for heavy metals, for microbial, for everything we need to do to prove that product is what it is. It meets our standards, our specifications, mm-hmm. before we will even order it. So you go into that 3-step process before you're allowed to purchase, qualifying the manufacturer, qualifying the vendor, qualifying the ingredient itself.
Right.
Okay?
So after that, then you can make a choice to purchase.
That's when it's released by the lab to the purchasing department, and they're allowed to now purchase that raw material. Okay. Okay, so that's basically the process of step 1.
Right, so you made the decision to buy it, or you're interested in it, you go through that process, right. Now you can move forward.
Now the purchasing department can purchase the product. Mm-hmm. So when they purchase that product, it comes in, what we have is this like pre-section here before we can actually use it. So 1, purchasing it, and then it goes into quarantine. Right. So every single batch of every single ingredient that comes into here goes into a separate warehouse. It's a quarantine warehouse. Right. And every ingredient that is coming into our facility, every single batch, it's hundreds and hundreds a month, goes into that facility. It's not allowed into this production warehouse here. Okay? Right. Once it gets into there, we then take a sample in a clean room. That sample goes into our lab. And we go through multiple step process of testing this. The first thing we'll do is test it in-house in our facility. Right. And what we'll do there is most importantly a qualitative test, and that's identity testing. So most of our ingredients will go through something called FTNIR, Fourier Transfer Near Infrared Spectroscopy. And what we're doing is we're testing, let's say that's creatine monohydrate, we're testing it to make sure it's creatine monohydrate.
So it's not testing purity, just testing identity.
Right. Qualitative means we're seeing what it is, but we don't know the percentage of purity. Right. That will be quantitative we do afterwards.
Well, you know it's in there at least.
Right. And then we might do organoleptic testing in-house, color, smell, aroma, look, feel, particle size, pH in addition to that. So we'll do certain testing to make sure what it is. Now, the reason we do that is because we want to make sure the product qualitatively is what it's supposed to be, that it wasn't messed up on the way in.
So you don't even waste your time forward.
Yeah, it doesn't even do anything beyond that. If it passes that test, then every single batch goes out to a third-party lab. So that's why I say it's a 2-step process. Internally, we do this identity and qualitative testing to make sure it's what it's supposed to be. Right. If it passes, it goes out to a third-party lab, and that lab is going to do full testing for purity, potency, composition, identity, organoleptics, heavy metals, whatever else we have to do. Because if we buy, let's keep it on one product, creatine monohydrate, we want that creatine monohydrate to be 99.98% more pure. So then it's going to go out, that would go through HPLC testing, and then we would get back and make sure that it's within the spec that we want in pH and a whole bunch of things like that. So that's quantitative and qualitative, two-step system.
Right.
Okay, we have a lab here. The controller there is a PhD. She heads the lab, and we, I think, have 6 people just in quality control in the company. Mm. And she's the only one.
For such a small company, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, we're not a big company. Right. Yeah. So it's a big expense to put on the products to do that all internally. Right. She's the only one who can then release it. So once she goes through all the testing methodologies, make sure everything matches, once she gets it back from the lab, once she qualifies the certificate of analysis that's come in with the product, matching it to the specifications that it's supposed to be, all the paperwork, there could be 2, 3, 5, 10 sheets of paperwork that comes with it. Is it supposed to be non-GMO? Is it supposed to be kosher? Is it supposed to be vegetarian? Is it supposed to be vegan? All of that paperwork's got to be checked on every single lot to make sure what it is. So while it's out being third-party tested, we're going through, the lab is going through all that paperwork, make sure it is all what it's supposed to be. And we got an example today while you were here, that one of our products came in.
In fact, I have a copy of that.
Well, that's a different one.
It's a different one.
Yeah, this
is a separate problem.
We had 2, while you were here, we had 3 problems early today. One came in and it's supposed to be non-GMO, and the non-GMO was a new ingredient. The non-GMO statement was interesting. Right. It was non-GMO by European standards, but it was made out of dextrose, which was a GMO material. So
now this one came in, it was not the product that you would source.
This is a separate one.
You tested it yourself in-house, ended up not being the proper. It was a similar, but not what you were.
So you got to see this. So this is an actual spectroscopy scan. Right. So you can see, I don't know if the camera can see this.
Yeah, it might be a little hard to see.
But there's 2 scans on there. One of them is our reference sample, and the second one is the new product that we just brought in. And you can see how they do not match at all. So the product was what it was supposed to be. It was received against the C of O, received against all the paperwork was correct. We sampled it, went into our lab, it failed our lab. What happened? We started an investigation. We called the manufacturer. We found out that they put the wrong product in the container.
Mislabeled.
Same product, but a granulation instead of a powder. It changed the spectrogram of it. We wouldn't have been able to use that. Had we tried to use that and possibly encapsulate it or something, it would have messed up our process. So we caught it at the identity stage because it failed right away.
Right.
Sometimes we catch it and...
Now is that GMP standard, you've got to check identity, or can you take the C of A from the company that sent it to you once you ordered it?
Well, there's 2 ways. The old way before CFR 111 is companies just took a C of A from the manufacturer. That was their proof. You buy some from China, here's a C of A, it's in Chinese. Yeah, I can't even read the damn thing. And he's like, okay, there's my proof. But CFR 111 since 2008 requires you to identify every single batch. And then it also requires you to test the product to prove out that that certificate of analysis is correct. But here's where you can be a little lenient here, because the FDA doesn't require you to test every batch. It requires you to do the identity, the qualitative on every batch. But once you test it, you can take that C of A, you can test, let's say, the purity of it, the potency. You can prove out that C of A. If you've done it 3 times, well, in science, if you can prove it 3 times, and it's good, the FDA will allow you not to test it, and you kind of pick a period, a year and a half.
Random sample.
Yeah, and then when that year is over, then you retest it 1 time, and that requalifies it.
Right.
So you can qualify the material by testing it through the first 3 times it comes in, and then accept it for the next year. We don't allow that. So with us, we do the identity by regulation every single time, but we also do the testing of the ingredient every single time, because I don't know what's going to happen. I might have tested the first 3, it's good, and something like this comes along, and they just did something wrong with it.
Right.
So we test, third-party test, every single batch straight through. We don't allow it.
Just so people are aware, is expensive.
Oh yeah, it gets very expensive.
Yeah, it's really expensive to do that. Well, now you have people who go on batch or go online and see the batch testing of the product. That comes at the end product. Okay.
Right. All right. So that's what we do before. Now, during this process, it's still in this quarantine warehouse.
Right.
Once we do the identity, once we do the third party of each and every batch, once all the paperwork proves out, everything is done to our standard and our specification, then the lab manager can release it.
Right. So it comes out of here, and now we're going to go to the next step.
Now it goes into the warehouse. Okay. Now it's moving from one physical location into our production warehouse where it can be used. Every single container will have a stamp on it from the QC lab saying approved. It'll be dated and signed by the QC manager. Right. So it's not allowed to move through those doors unless that stamp is on there, signed by by the QC department that it has been tested and proven. So then we go into our formula. So this could be a single ingredient, or it might be part of a larger formula. It might be part of, we'll have what we call an MMR, a master manufacturing record, which is the formulation, all the processes, whether it has to be blended, milled, sifted.
So an SOP for the entire product.
Right, and that's computerized. It goes out to each different department so they know what they're doing.
Right.
That MMR creates what we call BPR, batch production record, and that's the one that will go on the floor and show every department exactly what they have to do step by step by step. Nothing is guessed in here.
Right.
If they have to screen it through a certain screen, the number of the screens on there, the time on the blend, everything is on there.
Right.
So that formula is already done. Now the product is released for the formula to go into the production department. Now this is really the key here. This is really important. Because what we've done so far is we've qualified the ingredient, we know it's what we need, we know the vendor, the manufacturer are good, we brought that ingredient in and we've tested that batch, we know it's exactly what it's supposed to be. But there could be a lot of mess ups with that product during the production, the post-purchase process.
Right.
So the first thing we do is we have something called, in the industry, it's called a pharmacy department. And that's just a fancy word for blending, for weighing department. So we have a specific room, clean room, and what happens is the warehouse will get a bill of material. All that bulk material that they need will go into this pharmacy room, and the pharmacy room is responsible for weighing that out. So we have a 5-check system in here, and this is our most important room to me.
Which I saw.
Yeah.
So it has a minimum of 2 people at all time.
Right.
So nobody can.
Exactly. I mean, all these powders are white.
Make mistakes.
Yeah,
right.
you can't tell once you mess it up.
Right.
So the system here is everything comes in. It comes in bulk. 2 people are in there. One person's got to pull the material, check all the reference numbers, check the labels against what's on the batch production record,
Right.
make sure the material is exactly what it is. The second person does the same thing. Then they weigh it. The second person looks at it, checks it on the scale. 2 people validate and verify the weight on the scale. Then each of them sign off that that material was weighed, the exact weight, and they initial it and they date it. So every single ingredient is checked by 2 people, the scale is checked by 2 people, and that scale's got to be validated each day, and that scale's got to be validated by an outside source every quarter. That's all got to be documented, and that's all got to be logged. And everything I'm showing here is not like talking. It's all in an SOP, a standard operating procedure, that's signed off, it's written. If we change anything, a new version has to be done, signed off, and every person who's using any of those procedures has to be trained. Their training is documented with an expiration date. Once they expire, they're not allowed to do it. So all these things sound like it's a lot of talking, but it's all in a procedure that if the FDA walks in here and I add that procedure, whether they require it or not, it's mandatory. They can catch me not doing something that they don't require, but I require. It's the same as if I broke their regulation. If it's in my SOP,
there's something I didn't know.
I've got it. So if I say I'm
you can break your own SOP that's not the FDA required and still get yourself in trouble.
Oh yeah, once you sign off on that SOP and they pull it and they're going to work
Right.
through my SOPs.
Right.
If I say I'm doing a process here and I'm not doing it,
Even though they don't require it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There you go.
It becomes your own regulation. You can't.
You just
can't-
have it.
right.
Interesting.
So this is a very important part. So the first thing, we have 2 people validating it, so it's a double check system. When that's finished, then the balance of this goes out, whatever's left over from the bulk goes out back to the warehouse. They've got to weigh it. If they gave 40 kilos of creatine for a 20 kilo use, so they're expecting 20 kilos back. If they get all their material back, they sign off, that documentation goes back, the QA manager goes in, and he checks out the whole room. So he will spot check the scales, spot check weights of some of the materials, containers and all that, and he will check the whole room out and he'll sign off it. Then the 5th process is everything coming together. The warehouse sign off coming in, the QC on the floor, paperwork coming in, the MMR, the BPR, excuse me, coming in, everything is signed off and approved by the quality assurance manager out there, and then this room can be released. So all of this here then gets shrunk wrap, labeled, so we now know it's part of this one process, and it'll go into the next process, which will be blending. Now that's different than the old way of doing it, or the non-GMP. The old way of doing it is, let's say you're blending chocolate protein, and you're going to do 10 blends, and you need 10 bags of protein for each. They'll bring a whole pallet in, 40 bags on the pallet, and the guy will be up on the blend and say, I need 10 bags. But there's 40 bags in the room, they can miscount. Then they'll check the chocolate and put that in the room, and there could be more or less. We don't allow that. Whatever was gone through this 5-step
So the margin of error using that process is big.
Oh yeah, because
Potentially.
absolutely
Huge.
Once this is a 5-step process, that's all that's allowed in the room. Now that room, if we go to blending here,
I also saw in that room they weren't weighing and stuff massive bags. They were taking out smaller amounts and doing them in increments.
It depends on the product.
Right.
Let's say it's protein and they have 40 bags.
Right.
They've got to weigh out every one of those 40 bags. If it's a 40 kilo bag, we don't accept that. We know the weight of that bag,
right.
we put it on a scale, we tear out the weight of the bag on the outside, and we check each one. It could be a half a pound over on this one,
right.
under, over. Then you get small ingredients. Maybe it's methylcobalamin, and you only need 600 grams. So you'll have a small
right.
bag of that, and that's got to be weighed out.
But if each bag is not 40 on the nose and you didn't check it, you
right.
can start to get pretty off. The margin of error can get higher and higher,
yeah,
obviously.
absolutely.
If each bag was off a half a pound, you
right.
got 40 or 50 pound bags,
right.
you could be way the hell off.
Yeah, you don't trust the manufacturer coming
right.
in.
Wait,
if you have creatine and it's a bunch of 20 kilo drums, you have to check, net it out, tear it out, and find out the weight of each one.
Now that's not GMP required, though, right? Do you think they're all doing that?
I don't know.
They're probably taking the word of the weight of the bag.
Some companies might. Any good high quality company in this point
right.
is going to be tearing that out because they want to make sure
right.
that weight is dead on.
Right. Obviously, they can save themselves a lot of hassle by doing this now.
Right.
And waiting until the end product
right.
is off dose or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So once you get to the blending room, it's the same process. Before the blending room is allowed to be used, it's got to be sanitized every time. QA department's got to go in there and approve it and sign off on it, or nobody's even allowed in it once it's sanitized. So they're checking the records for the sanitation and everything.
Right.
Then it's approved, then they can go in. So what happened, that whole pallet, or 5 pallets or whatever from here, will then go into this blending room that's been sanitized and approved by the QA department. Again, in here, it's the same two-step process. So you have all this material that's going to go in. At this point, we know the material is tested twice, internally, externally, it's perfect. We know it's gone through the pharmacy department. We've weighed it out to perfection. Now it's going in here. So we know what's in the room is right. We got to make sure we don't mess up in the blending. So we have 2 people in there. They'll go down. There'll be another sheet for them in that batch production record, and that'll be the blending sheet. And it'll say, give them exact directions. What blender to use, how much time. It'll tell them what ingredients to put in the order, and one ingredient will come out. They'll weigh it again. Okay, then they'll throw it in. One person checks it. They're checking the numbers. They're checking the batch numbers, making sure it's correct. Nothing happened along the way. And then they both sign off. It's a double check system. And each ingredient, each direction goes through that double check system. The timing on it, whether it's a 12-minute or an 8-minute or a 9-minute blend, it's got to be checked. Those
right.
timers have to be validated on a regular basis, because if the timer is off, the product's off. People don't realize if you're going to blend something for 12 minutes, and let's say your electricity is off,
right.
and it's lower, and your
RPM, the motor's getting old or something like that, right?
So now really your 12-minute blend's only a 9-minute blend. You haven't blended it. But what people don't realize is you can overblend. Somebody's not watching, they set it for 15 minutes and it's set at 12.
Mm-hmm.
You overblend that product, you segregate the ingredients. They start to re-separate out.
Right.
So there's an exact process before any of this happens.
So there's a proper time that the density of the material blends properly.
Right.
It starts being separated, it gets blended properly, and if it goes too long, it starts to separate back.
Ben, if you could point over here. So this is just an example. Let's say we're starting a new product. We will create that product first. It'll go into a pilot blender like this, and we will then figure out the testing time for it in this. We'll have a different blender for our ribbon blender or a paddle blender, but this is for the blender that you're seeing today. So what will happen is we'll come up with what we think is the right time based on some
right.
experience.
And
in
you
the
were
past.
explaining you then test it in 3 different places.
Right. Well,
right.
What we have to do here with that pilot is then we have to test it. We have to make sure that product meets. If it's branched chain amino acids, we did it for 12 minutes. We now test all 3 of the branched chains, make sure they're there, and we get that to the exact timing that we want.
Right.
Now, what you're talking about is
you get the dispersion you want right in the product. Right?
Then that goes on the MMR, and that becomes the exact time that's given to the blend. But that's not an arbitrary time. We have to prove out that time in each blend and for every single batch size. So if we go from a 40 kilo
it's not
batch
like making
size,
your protein drink at home and walking away and taking a pee and coming back.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's a wild process.
Okay.
So then you're in the blending room, and that's what's happened. They go through every direction. 2 people sign off on it. When it's done, QA has to go back in again. So the QA department's got to validate all the paperwork, and there's critical control points along the way. A major critical control point here, is that if we put in 100 kilos, we're expecting 100 kilos of finished product out. So their batch production record will show a plus or minus of 1%. Mm-hmm. They have to be within that. So as every batch is coming out, it'll go into those large bags. Those bags are weighed, and it has to be within 1% over or under of what it's supposed to be. If it's off by that 1%, then QA will not let it go. We've got to figure it out. So for example, if they spill something before it goes into the blender, they've got to stop. They've got to scoop it up, they've got to weigh it, they've got to call QA in. QA's got to replace that material, sign off on it, and make sure it's done. Yeah. If they do it at the end of the batch, they open up the blender and they spill 100 kilos on the ground, they got to stop. If they don't take an account of that, then the blend's going to be off by 9%. They've got to weigh that, QA's got to come in, approve it, subtract it from the total, recalculate your plus or minus, and come up with a new number, and then if they're within that 1%, they can prove. So you have these critical control points in the testing here along the way that you've got to stop. Another critical control point in the blending here is that we have to make sure that the blend is homogeneous. So again, we know the manufacturer is good, we know the ingredient is good, we know we brought it in here and we weighed it out properly and everything is done here. But how do we know that within that blender, although all the right ingredients are in there, that the chocolate's not shoved in the bottom and we didn't mix enough? So we'll take different samples, maybe high, middle, right, low, and we'll do FT&IR on that, and we'll look to make sure that they match. Again, that's qualitative. We're not showing how much creatine is in there, but we're making sure that all three of those blends
have what's in there was supposed to be in there.
Are the same. If they're not the same, then that means more chocolate's here, more creatine's there. Right. We've got a problem. So there are critical control points along the way to make sure that you're following your processes and your processes are working out. And once you finish all that here, then the QA department is allowed to release it after they, again, inspect the room.
Right. You get all that, folks?
Everything.
So as you see, it's a really long, granular process, and this is absolutely not all of it. Not even close. This is, it's a lot more intensive and granular than my short little video, but now you're really getting the nitty-gritty of how a company that cares about quality goes through all of these steps to make this happen.
I've been given 12 minutes. How far are we?
22.
Okay, so we left a lot of stuff out to try and get it to 12, and we're at 22 already. So now, once it's here, it goes right back to where we started, this quarantine. Right. So we start, the material comes in, we quarantine it, we do that double testing, we release it through the production process. At the end, when it finishes this blend, it goes to packaging, obviously. Mm-hmm. Once it's done packaging, the finished product goes right back into the quarantine warehouse, where it sits. Again, we do the same process. We take a sample, we test it internally. If it passes qualitative, every single batch, every single lot of finished product gets tested in a third-party lab. And our QC department cannot release it until that third-party lab comes in. All specifications are checked.
None of which is required by GMP. This is you doing that, I'm assuming. Every single batch tested.
Well, actually, CFR 111 requires you to prove the finished product makes label claim. You can do that in multiple ways. You can test it once,
right,
or three times, so your process is proven.
And that's
then you can skip. You can test in different ways. We test every single batch, and we do a third party. GMP doesn't require a third party. It's an extra expense.
And you put it online.
And we put it online, right.
People can actually go look at the batch they purchased.
Yeah, if you buy one of our products right in the store, you can look at the lot number on the bottom.
Yeah.
You can go to either our site, go to the product, or go to a site called checkmysups.com. Put in this lot number, and that third-party independent lab test that we did will show up. So until that lab test comes in, till QC approves it, approves all other specifications, taste testing, organoleptics, and stuff like that, it's not allowed to be released. Once that's done, it's released, those tests go online, the consumer can see that, and it goes into our warehouse. So you have this quarantine in the beginning, quarantine at the end, in separate warehouses. Testing is done on both sides, and that's how we know that the product is good. Now this should hit 99.99% of the time. If we're doing all these processes correctly, right, we should not have problems here, but sometimes you do.
Yeah. Okay, well, I would say that covers the main topic. Obviously people have sat through this, got a real good feel of how this really works, and you'll be able to check out my articles and links for more information or less, depending on what you want. So, Will Brink, over and out.
All right, Will, thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.